This production was created for CFUW Oshawa's 75th anniversary. It was meant as a supplement to our in-person celebrations, but then the COVID pandemic was upon us, and in-person meetings were a thing of the past. Here we are 5 years later, celebrating 80 proud years of our club history. We have once again planned a tea in recognition of this event. It is being held at Adelaide House, fitting indeed, as that is where our club began. We are highlighting significant world events, Canadian stories, and snapshots of our club, reflecting the world around us at the time. Your memories will be awakened as you travel through the decades, and we hope you will come away from this with admiration and hope for our future. And here are the women who worked on both of the anniversaries: Karen, Joni, Judy, Joanne, Melanie, Barbara, Donna, Sharon, Lena, Ruth, and Hetty. My apologies to anyone. The journey begins. With the end of the war in Europe and the Pacific to follow shortly thereafter, the world had changed in ways that could not be undone. From the violence of World War II emerged the Cold War with the constant threat of nuclear oblivion. Life changed for women once again, with all the men returning and needing employment. Women were once more expected to return to their homes after answering the wartime call to work in factories. Canada followed the United States' lead by marginalizing Japanese Canadians. In 1945, what was then commonly known as the baby bonus was established by the government of the day. In 1946, Canada defined what it meant to be a Canadian citizen. At the same time, Viola Desmond was fighting for her human rights as a person of color. Newfoundland joined Confederation, and with a sense of deja vu, we see children getting their lessons over the radio because of the polio epidemic. In the midst of all of this, University Women's Club Oshawa and District was founded. Lois Cullis, a dual member, has a familial tie to these origins. 43 women, 63 by the end of the year, $3 membership. A sign of the time, women still were identified by their husband's first and last name. In essence, getting married meant losing your identity. However, married women were now allowed to teach. Here's what it might have been like for a woman in the 1940s. Most women university graduates were either career women or homemakers. Very few were both. The newly formed club provided a meeting ground where they could find intellectual stimulation, increase their awareness of current issues, and take collective action. In the 40s, formality was observed in all business meetings, and social niceties were a priority. This from the first 40 years, 1945 to 1985. The fabulous 50s saw organ transplants, polio vaccine, the pacemaker, a TB antibiotic, chemotherapy, just to name a few. We saw the first credit card. Nuclear bomb shelters started to appear. The Commonwealth had a 25-year-old queen, and the Americans were chasing reds, while Rosa Parks also wouldn't budge. For women, there was an emerging discontent, as illustrated by Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, which challenged the view of women as inferior. The 50s, a time of conformity, with women pressured to leave wartime jobs, focus on homemaking, and pursuing the American dream of marriage and home ownership, with emphasis on a strong family unit. The post-war baby boom was in full swing in Canada, and a young Marilyn Bell was swimming Lake Ontario. Lester Pearson and John Diefenbaker were the prime ministers of the day, and Ellen Fairclough became the first female cabinet minister. Lester Pearson won the Nobel Peace Prize for his brokering of the end of the Suez Canal crisis. Immigration to Canada became the goal of many. At the local level, Oshawa received its CFUW charter, and in 1952, reports moved from handwritten to typewritten. The club attracted some very high profile speakers and adopted a Hungarian displaced woman living in Germany. At a national level, the first delegation to the Prime Minister was undertaken, discussing appointment of women to the National Parole Board, support for a national library and gallery, and advocating for Hungarian refugees suffering from tuberculosis. In this swinging era, women began to experience more educational opportunities, while the music industry, particularly but not limited to folk, addressed social issues. The advent of the pill gave women more freedom, and authors such as Margaret Atwood and Betty Friedan were laying the groundwork for a women's revolution. The Vietnam War was in all of our consciousness when we weren't screaming for the Beatles or crying over the death of JFK. On a happy note, for the first time, we were able to see the Earth from the moon. Significant milestones for Canada during this era included First Nations receiving the right to vote, not till 1960, and Tommy Douglas and the CCP converted to NDP with Douglas as the leader. Social insurance numbers were instituted, and we got a new flag. Some of you may have attended Expo 67 in Montreal, and a few, I'm sure, succumbed to Trudeau mania. Pierre, that is. That was followed by Canada becoming officially a dual language nation. Laura Sabia was successful in coordinating 34 women's groups to lobby for the human rights of women in Canada, resulting in the Royal Commission on the Status of Women. When we revisited that topic a few years ago, we saw how much more needed to be done. The 60s were a busy time for the club. Oshawa hosted the first public meeting on abortion and its removal from the criminal code. Reading Group 1 began in the 60s, and it continues through today. Bridge was also becoming popular, and club news was covered in the women's section of the newspaper. Membership cost all of $10, and Betty Siberry joined the club in 1969. In the 70s, Mother Teresa of Calcutta won the Nobel Peace Prize, and Indira Gandhi became the first and only woman Prime Minister of India. Margaret Thatcher also joined those ranks. The United Nations proclaimed 1975 the International Year of the Woman, and in business, Microsoft and Apple both began in those years. The world had its first test tube baby, Louise Brown, in 1978. The Jonestown Massacre shocked North America, and 4 Kent State students were murdered by the National Guard. During the disco 70s in Canada, multiculturalism became policy in Canada, and the metric system was adopted, confusing many of us to this day. Rosemary Brown from British Columbia became the first Black female legislator. Pauline McGibbon was inducted as the first woman lieutenant governor of Ontario. In 1976, the first Take Back the Night Walk took place in Canada. We abolished capital punishment, and the RCMP accepted its first female recruits. The club was very active in the community during this decade. It explored the topic of working mothers and developed a school pilot project for career counseling for girls. It also produced a 4-segment Women at Work TV series, and they published the magazine Parent Talk. This was eventually taken over by the Oshawa Times for wider distribution. And finally, women began to use their own given names. I recall insisting that I was Mrs. Joanne, not Barry. The decade started with Canadian Ambassador Ken Taylor as an unlikely hero of the Iran embassy crisis. John Lennon was murdered, and technology was driving socio and economic change. The Berlin Wall came down, and the American space program experienced a horrific catastrophe. And then there was the fairy tale wedding that wasn't a fairy tale at all. In Canada, in the 80s, Terry Fox ran his Marathon of Hope, creating a legacy that is alive today. It was a decade of firsts for Canadian women: Jean Sauvé, Bertha Wilson, Audrey McLaughlin, and Heather Erxleben. Supreme Courts make landmark decisions regarding abortion, and 14 young women lost their lives in Montreal just because they were women. Air India Flight 182 exploded in midair, killing 329 people. It was the largest disaster in Canada to that point. Sikh extremists were to blame. For Oshawa and District in the 80s, membership peaked at 224. That was in 1981-82 club year. We established the Capital Reserve Fund. We also published the successful cookbook, Food with Flair. 74% of club members worked outside of the home, quite a departure from the early years. Roberta Bondar was our guest speaker, and this was the Just Say No to Drugs era. In the 1980s, many more women were holding university degrees, and most of them were combining careers with marriage and family. There was less time for formality during this era, and certainly no time for artificial niceties. Yet, despite the social differences that 40 years have brought about, the common thread continues. University women concern themselves with public affairs, education, and women's issues, both at home and internationally. Over our 40 years, club members have provided leadership in the community by serving on boards of education and other boards, commissions, and organizations within the region, as well as taking their places on CFUW committees. The founding members of the University Women's Club of Oshawa and District have earned the appreciation of succeeding generations of graduates who have come and will continue to come into the club. To the charter members, we gratefully and affectionately dedicate this informal story of the first 40 years. The 1990s saw the first genetically modified produce created, Nelson Mandela elected president of South Africa, and the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed. First for women was Louise Arbour being named chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunals. Helen Clark was elected in New Zealand, and Madeleine Albright became the first American woman to be Secretary of State. In Canada, the decade began with the Oka crisis. Kim Campbell became the first woman Minister of Justice, and 3 years later was Prime Minister for mere months. Rita Johnson of British Columbia was the first woman Premier in Canada, and Catherine Colbeck was the first woman Premier of PEI. Nunavut became a new territory in Canada, while Roberta Bondar went into space. The maple leaf was designated as our arboreal symbol, and Canadian women's hockey team brought home world gold. CFUW received special consultative status at the United Nations. During the 1990s, member Carolyn Alexander was instrumental in the establishment of Hearth Place for cancer sufferers. The club hosted the Ontario Council AGM and underwent a name change in this decade. We celebrated 50 years of existence in 1995, creating a new banner. You see Karen and Sue enjoying the festivities. CFUW was represented at the United Nations 4th Women's Conference, and Linda Poulin was passing the gavel to new president Monica Lancaster. In this decade, climate change and global warming became household words. Lots of doomsday prophecies around the turn of the century that came to naught, but the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center changed our world irrevocably. Technology introduced us to platforms we use today without even thinking about it. The Human Genome Project was completed, and the euro, a European currency, went into circulation. And the US elected its first black man as president. In Canada, Beverly McLaughlin became our first female Chief Justice. Canada entered the war in Afghanistan, and Canadians honored their dead with the Highway of Heroes. Canada signed on to the Kyoto Accord, and same-sex marriage was legalized. SARS was a medical challenge of that time. The water supply in Walkerton was tainted, and the final report on missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls was released. In 2003, National began sending delegates to the United Nations Committee on the Status of Women. Locally, Breaking Bread was an immensely successful undertaking featuring Sally Armstrong. And we welcomed Marina Nemeth, author of the autobiographical Prisoner of Tehran. We supported Take Back the Night with our presence, and the Refuge in Luke's Place with financial support. While the Queen celebrated 75 years as monarch, Steve Jobs was introducing the Apple iPad, and Instagram was launching. Julian Assange began publishing WikiLeaks, sharing classified information worldwide. The US legalized same-sex marriage, and Black Lives Matter was born, along with the Me Too movement, women finally getting justice in the courts. Greta Thunberg began her school strike movement for climate change, and a soft landing on the far side of the moon was accomplished. Our American neighbors unbelievably elected Donald Trump as their president, and we entered pandemic mode. During the decade 2010 to 2020 in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission published its findings with 94 calls to action. Vancouver put on an unforgettable Winter Olympics show, and Canada, along with NATO allies, pulled out of Afghanistan. Under Bill C-14, we've entered deeper into euthanasia. The country elected another Trudeau as prime minister, this time Pierre's son Justin. And as promised, marijuana became legal. During this decade also, Big Pharma laid the groundwork for an opioid crisis. Canada was locked in a diplomatic dispute with Huawei and China, and the two Michaels, Spavor and Kovrig, paid the price. Home ownership was moving out of reach as house prices soared. Membership requirements were changed so that university degrees were no longer required for membership. Also in this decade, CFUW National celebrated 100 years, and we celebrated 75. Just a year late, and not quite how we planned. During this decade, the Advocacy Committee tackled the issue of female genocide in countries such as China and India, and we examined the hypersexualization of young people. The club also celebrated its 65th anniversary with current and past members in attendance. We partnered in an all-candidates meeting, and our scholarship fundraising included 2 successful fashion shows. Along with the Ajax Pickering Club, we co-hosted the Ontario Council annual general meeting with the theme of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and its importance to girls. There's no doubt that COVID changed our world. During our lockdown, employers pivoted, a word often used in reference to quick changes made necessary by our isolation and lockdown. A large percentage of the working population began to do so from home. An extraordinary number of deaths were caused by COVID, with the largest percentage found in nursing homes and other institutional settings. Yes, the elderly paid the biggest price, dying alone. School went online, and children lost the benefit of in-person interaction. Government created a program to funnel money to those who were unable to work because of COVID. And the aftermath saw a technological change explosion. We learned the benefits of masking. Employees were resistant to returning to the office, and a shift to selfishness occurred, evidenced on our roads, sidewalks, and in public in general. Here is a snapshot of the first 22 months of COVID in Canada, as created by Statistics Canada. The COVID-19 pandemic caused us to learn the importance of hand washing, mask wearing, and social distancing. We closed our borders, started working from home. Our children attended school virtually, and that was how we met as well. Our hair began to sport more gray than it ever did. Our club, along with many others, made the significant but controversial decision to leave GWI, which is Graduate Women International. The US President, Joe Biden at the time, had 2 women backing him up, and that was kind of a welcome change, and we hoped a portent of things to come. But we didn't have a crystal ball, so we were only speculating. The world beyond 2020 has seen tumultuous times. World-changing actions have left most of us in shock, and we still live with the aftermath. The UK voted to leave the European Union under the Brexit banner. December 2020, the COVID vaccine was developed, and the battle to eliminate COVID began. The US Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, restarting the abortion debate and eroding women's rights. January 2021, Trump, who would not acknowledge defeat, encouraged insurrection by his followers, and the Capitol was attacked and breached. Inflation soared. Unbelievably, the Taliban once again ruled Afghanistan, and Afghani women returned to the oppression they previously suffered under. February 4, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that war continues. October 7, 2023, Hamas terrorists crossed into Israel, attacking innocent people, and started a horrendous war that continues today. We see the global democratic recession continuing. And a brain implant allowed a paralyzed man to walk using his thoughts. What a remarkable world. In 2024, however, Donald Trump won a second term as President of the United States. The world has not been the same since, as he wreaks havoc on the economy and the world order, pursuing in less than democratic ways his personal agenda. We don't know when the chaos will end or where we will land. God help us all. Since we began this project, Canada has experienced significant changes, including the death of Queen Elizabeth II, a long-serving monarch who for many of us was the only personage in that role. NAFTA was replaced with CUSMA, Canadian-US-Mexican Agreement on Trade. King Charles ascended the throne, and a future King George was born. Governor General Julie Payette was forced to resign, and Bill C-16, affirming transgender and gender diverse rights, was passed, not without controversy. Wildfires have loomed large throughout the country, and a refugee crisis has had a significant negative impact on Canada. Residential schools were scrutinized and recognized for their full impact on those who lived through them. Canada also saw an influx of international students. The Canadian truckers' protest in Ottawa was a memorable event, spurred on by resistance to COVID restrictions. The truckers came to Ottawa and they stayed. As we move forward, CFUW Oshawa District has returned to in-person meetings, although board meetings continue online for convenience sake. And although our membership is not large, we have added new members and look with hope to our future. Our core purpose as an organization is scholarships for women and girls. In this regard, we have much to brag about. And here are the numbers. Just a small sampling of the recipients of our scholarships. Many of our members have made their mark in endeavors outside of CFUW, and we have benefited from that as a club. The YWCA Woman of Distinction Award was awarded to a good number of our members, and these women had other achievements to boast about. Apologies to anyone if you were missed. We are all women of distinction, some recognized, some not. Certainly, the friendships made and the good times experienced contribute to the longevity. However, without the efforts of members serving on executives and committees over the years, we wouldn't be here today. I dare say most of the members can count themselves in that number, and you are all to be congratulated. Without leadership, though, we would be a rudderless ship, and that would be reflected in lack of achievements to boast. Yet we have so many that this celebration should not pass without acknowledgement of the members who stepped up to become presidents. Looking beyond 2025, the future, CFUW Oshawa and District has for over 80 years watched society evolve, responding generously where necessary, and always keeping its focus on a better world for women and girls. It has demonstrated an ability to adjust to changing norms while remaining relevant in its approach to advocacy, one of the cornerstones of the organization. It continues to be a beacon for fellowship where members laugh together, work together, celebrate achievements, and forge lifelong friendships with other women. What does the future hold? The crystal ball is cloudy, but we will continue, as long as practical, to espouse what it means to be a member of CFUW, realizing potential for all women.